live in a society exquisitely dependent on science and technology, in which hardly anyone knows anything about science and technology. And that is such a true statement today. We have so much technology coming out that's being consumed by consumers or being pushed out to the consumers. They have no idea how they operate. They just know that, hey, it works. And yet they don't know what vulnerabilities, and in some cases, as IT guys, we don't know what vulnerabilities actually are created because of these cool features. Now, because of that, we want to make sure that you truly understand what it is you face. And when we talk about this, we're going to go through in this module and take a look at security threats. What would be considered a security threat? What creates a path or a way into your environment? What type of technology creates that for us? We'll also take a look at attack vectors. So we want to make sure that you understand what you face. And when we talk about that, we really want to focus in on three specific areas. One being the security threats that are coming your way, different types of threats that can be created, whether they're from a human being or from a system. There are different types of threats that are created. Some of them are non-intentional. We'll also take a look at attack vectors, or in other words, different ways or paths that attackers might try to come into your environment. And then we'll take a look at IPv6. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because it's becoming more and more prevalent today. As companies and folks are making the transition over to IPv6, it's really cool because it does a lot of things automatically for us. But unfortunately, automatic usually means issues. So let's start with the security threats, or as I like to call it, what could possibly be a threat on my network? I know, that's what you were thinking, right? Well, we'll go through and make sure you understand that there are several different items that can create threats in your environment. One of them would be hosts. Another would be possibly natural threats. We'll also take a look at physical threats that get created, as well as application threats. To me, this is one of the big issues that we have. Applications, either they're in-house applications or pre-purchased applications. And then we'll take a look at the threats that humans create for us, or as I like to call it, stupid is as stupid does. And then, of course, we'll take a look at network threats. So let's focus in on the first one. Hosts. There are several different threats that can be created by a host. And when I say a host, I'm talking about a computer, whether it's a server or a workstation, or even a host could be a tablet or a cell phone if need be. The first thing that it creates, or the type of threat that it creates for us, is what they refer to as a footprinting threat. And what we mean by this is that every computer or every system responds a specific way. And based off of that, well, we have a whole module coming up on footprinting, but to give you kind of a 10,000 foot view here, if I throw a specific command and a Windows box responds one way versus a Linux box responds another way, I will be able to tell what system it is or what the target is so I can throw the appropriate attacks or see if there's any vulnerabilities there. Another type of threat that gets created by a host is ones that are based off physical security. Is the laptop locked down? My wife, when she worked for Blockbuster Video, she went to a convention where she was doing the presentation. She had her laptop in her purse and she left it up on the stage. They all went to lunch. She came back. Somebody had stolen her purse and her laptop. I've also seen situations where people store servers out in the open next to Billy Bob in the other room. Or I've actually seen one in a closet, which was kind of interesting. Another type of threat that we might experience are password threats. A lot of companies don't have really good password policies, and we've got a whole section coming in here in this course that will talk about passwords, and I'm going to really harp on you. I'm going to jump up on a soapbox because you thinking that using a @ sign to represent an A or $ representing an S or a 3 representing an E is somehow tricky and you're going to throw me for a loop, yeah, you're not. When it comes to passwords, it's always in the length of the passwords. Special characters do help, but you just got to make sure that they don't follow a standard like the $ representing an S. But we'll talk about this more later. Just know that this is one of the threats that can be created on a host, as well as malware. You know, malware's gotten really kind of interesting over the years. It started off where it just installed, we would see things like it installing an extra search bar for you, or you would install an extra piece of software. Nowadays, we're seeing things that are extremely violent. I don't want to say violent, extremely intrusive. In some cases, I refer to it as extortionware. One of the latest ones, you get it on your machine, it actually encrypts the hard drive, and you have to send them a payment to get the key to unencrypt your own data. It was never your fault. In fact, since you sent them your credit card, odds were they were going to also drain your account. Another type of threats that we experience on host machines include denial of services. Now, denial of services, again, this could be one of those situations where it could be intentional or non-intentional. And what I mean by that is that intentional denial of services is where something gets affected on purpose and creates an environment where people can't gain access to that resource. Unintentionally, it could be an issue with, I've seen this in the real world, where a network card was defective and was creating a ton of network traffic and actually bogging down and taking up all the bandwidth. Another type of threat that we experience is unauthorized access. Billy Bob should not be able to walk up to a server and log in if he's not an IT person. Billy Bob should not be able to use somebody else's credentials to gain access to resources. Unauthorized access should never be allowed. Give an example of this. Again, when my wife was working for Blockbuster, they had a rule initially that was it was a policy that wasn't really followed very well until this particular situation happened. And that is the customer service rep was helping check out videos to a customer, and the customer got the wrong video. So the rep said, well, let me just go grab it for you. And she walked away without 3 fingers saluting, locking the computer or logging it out, the system. And she walked away, and the customer looked around the corner, was able to look around and see the screen. And in there were some notes about her. And some of the notes were not very flattering concerning a situation that had happened previously with another customer service rep. Lady sued and won. So then Blockbuster came out with the extremely strict policy that if you left a terminal unlocked, it allowed for unauthorized access, and people end up losing their jobs. Another threat that we might encounter with hosts would include escalated privileges or privilege escalation. This is actually one of my main focuses as a hacker. If I can get in with Billy Bob's account, I'm either going to do one of a couple of things. I'm either going to take Billy Bob's account and escalate his privileges, and if I can accomplish that, then Billy Bob's going to get blamed for everything. Or I might try to create an account and escalate those privileges. I'm never going to create an account named after my name. I'm going to create an account. I'm going to actually kind of hide it and then try to escalate it up so that it can do the attacking for me. And that gets me to backdoors. Now, backdoors are typically created by malware or Trojans, giving us the attacker a way to get back into the system a lot easier than what it required when he got into the system at the beginning. We want to make it very, very easy for us to get back in. One of the most common ways that I've tested and tried doing is I'll actually go in and take a look at service accounts. In fact, this is one of the things I try to get across when it comes to security and ethical hacking is review your service accounts. Obviously, if I go in as an attacker and say I'm going to create an account called Zeus and give it administrative rights, and you're the IT guy and you look at it and you go, what's this Zeus thing? That sticks out really, really obviously. But instead, if I go through and create an account that's called Exchange Admin Backup Services, well, unless you know Exchange and you know what accounts it creates, you may not question that particular account, because we all know that if we delete the wrong account that deals with a service, we could actually end up affecting that particular service. So, if I delete it, maybe I'm going to blow up Exchange. Now, another type of security threat are ones based off of natural threats, which could include the old-fashioned and good reliable earthquakes, as well as hurricanes, floods, and natural disasters. These typically we don't have any control over. Information damage or any type of loss can't be prevented for obvious reasons. However, you can go through and create some plans, policies, procedures, put those in place to help protect against these natural disasters. So then we also have physical threats. Physical threats, we might actually see theft as an issue for us. We've talked about theft already, but also impact. And when we talk about impact, I'm not talking about the impact that the theft has or that it may have on the business, even though that is an issue, but I'm talking about dropping a laptop, or a frustrated employee, or my favorite, dropping a cell phone in a toilet. How do you recover from that information loss? Also, power. We know about power surges, getting too much power coming down the line, affecting data and destroying data sometimes, but also brownouts. Brownouts are actually as dangerous as a power surge. This is where the power dips and in some cases puts stress on the components. And of course, we also have end of life. Now, I'm going to slow down here for a second because I want to talk to you about end of life. End of life is what do we do with systems as we retire them, as we decommission them. Well, I know a lot of companies go through and do some really cool things. Sometimes they'll donate old hardware to some charities, and I think that's great. Or they might actually put them up for sale to their employees so that they can take a system home. Or they might just throw them away. And in some cases, they may even just return them, especially if it's like on a lease. Now, my question I have for you is, what are you doing to protect yourself with the data that was stored on the drives? I really don't care about memory. I really don't care about video cards or motherboards. It's where I store my data. Even if you go through and format hard drives, that's not going to protect you. Trust me, I've got fun little tools that'll go through and recover data from a formatted drive. I actually saw a really scary news story where they were talking about copy machines. And back in the old days of copy machines, we'd put our master up on top, or the original up on top, and you'd see the light bar go across, and it would scan the master, and then a page would print out. And then the light bar would go again across, and it would print out another page. And it'd keep doing this. So if you had 50 copies, that light bar went across 50 times, and it created a copy. Well, as technology expanded, they started installing hard drives into copy machines. And so nowadays, we see the light bar scan once, and boom, 50 copies come right out. And that's because it stored the data on the hard drive and just reproduces it based off that image. The issue is, and this is what we saw in the news story, is that when the copiers come off lease, they go back and are sometimes resold. Well, one of the biggest purchasers of remanufactured copy machines is China. Yeah, do the math there for a second. They're the biggest one. I shouldn't say that they're the only one. But what an interesting concept. And in fact, in the story, they went and they purchased a copy machine at an auction. They went through, pulled the hard drive out, mounted it up with some software, were able to pull off the images. And the images, the copy machine had been at an attorney's office. And they were able to pull off tax returns and a ton of legal information. They actually contacted the legal firm to let them know what had happened, to make sure that they were covered. So I'm a real stickler when it comes to hard drives, and I've seen some really cool solutions to this when it comes to end of life. Several government agencies that I've done some training for, I always ask, so what do you guys do about end of life stuff? And they tell me that there was one particular facility, they had a big machine press, and they could stack 5 hard drives on top of each other, push a magic button, and it squished, became basically 2 hard drives. Yeah, not really, just squished it down to that size. And they totally destroyed. They never allowed hard drives to be reused. So when you start to think about end of life, you need to think about where is it going and what information could be on there. Again, I'm more concerned about the hard drives than I am anything else. Nothing else is going to store data. Okay, applications also create threats for us. First of all, configuration. Many times we install software and we just take the defaults. In fact, I always laugh when people install a piece of software and they go next, 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 next. And all of a sudden they're shocked and surprised that they have a new toolbar. That's a bad example, but you know what I'm trying to get across here is that sometimes we install software and without configuring it properly, we could actually expose ourselves to additional threats. Another great example of this would be, let's say you go down to your local technical store and you pick up your new Linksys router and you bring it home and you follow the instructions. It says plug it in, turn it on, push a magic button, and hey, does it work? Yeah, it works great. Yeah, so how secure is it? What's the password? Well, I'll tell you what the default password. Let's see, on a Linksys router, it's either admin as a username and admin as the password, or it's admin as the username or blank password, or it's admin as the username and password as the password. You don't want to set up something and take default configurations. Also, we have buffer overflow issues. Now, with this screenshot, you're probably thinking, Dale, that's a blue screen of death. And you're right, it is. It could be caused by a buffer overflow. A buffer overflow occurs when you have a process or a program that's trying to store more data in the buffer than what it was intended to hold, and in which case it overflows into the next area of the buffer. Now, sometimes this can actually happen accidentally through programming errors. Buffer overflow, however, is becoming increasingly common in the types of attacks that we see on data integrity. In fact, back in 2000, there was a famous buffer overflow that affected both Microsoft Outlook and Outlook Express. And what happened is that there was a flaw in the programming that made it possible so that a hacker could compromise a system just by simply sending an email to the target. They didn't have to open the email. They didn't have to read the email. They didn't have to forward the email. Because the program's message header mechanism had a defect, it made it possible for the senders to overflow the area of data, and then it allowed the attacker to execute whatever code they wanted to on the client's machine. Now, this whole process took place as soon as the recipient hooked into their mail server. And so it was very, very hard to go through and defend and fix. Microsoft finally had to release a patch for it to stop it from happening. We also have lazy coding. Lazy coding, now I don't want to offend any developers here, so I'm not going to group you all together, but there are some programmers that are lazy and they copy and paste code between applications or shared code. We actually end up dealing with something called a shrink wrap attack, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. Any type of coding that's utilized in in-house development should be reviewed. If you purchase customized software for your industry, somebody should be reviewing that information to find out what's there. Because the last thing you want to do is install an application that's going to create a whole new threat for you. And lastly, we've got data and input validation. So what this does is this is typically focused in on web-based applications. Web-based, and the most notorious of this is what they refer to as SQL injection, but it happens everywhere. Developers go through, we create these web applications, they run beautifully. When we have these fields that people fill out information, it expects certain fields. Sometimes they don't even differentiate what type of information is supposed to be in there, whether it's alphanumeric, or it's digits, or what. And based off of that, if I don't validate the input or the data that gets thrown into these fields, an attacker can actually cause the software to have basically a hiccup and then allow me in through a vulnerability. And again, like I said, this is what SQL injection did to us, is it allowed the attacker to hit your external website, maybe as a website for ordering product, and if he could figure out that you were using an SQL service, actually he didn't even have to figure it out. He could issue a couple commands and find out if it responded. And if it responded like an SQL server that hadn't been patched, from the first name field, if that was the name of the first field that was there, he could actually go in and do things like select object and go through and select a database and create an account. It's really, really quite scary. So anytime you deal with applications, you need to make sure that folks are doing data and input validation. So let's talk about our networking threats. When it comes to networking threats, some of our issues include sniffing and eavesdropping. Who is sniffing the network? Anybody? I can download a sniffing program and throw it on my desktop and start looking for, I'm going to filter this and say, find me anything that says Dale in it and Ray's. And maybe I'm going to modify that email so I add an extra digit or two to that email. We also need to be aware of ARP poisoning. And what we mean by ARP poisoning is this, and we'll get into this a little bit later on as well, but ARP is the Address Resolution Protocol, which is in charge of resolving an IP address to a MAC address, which is the NIC card, right? Well, if I can ARP poison you, and typically you are aware of a default gateway so that you can go out on the internet, but if I can ARP poison and change the MAC address that your computer thinks is the router or the default gateway, instead being my machine, I'm going to route you right through my machine, and then I'll go ahead and send it to the default gateway and get you out to the internet. But I'm going to also capture information as you type it in or as the traffic passes through. We also have issues with denial of service attacks. Again, the concept here behind denial of service attacks is to deny services from being rendered. Sometimes, again, it's intentional. Sometimes it's not intentional. We also have spoofing, or pretending to be somebody that you're really not. Let's see, I'll put this in superhero terms. Superman pretends to be Clark Kent. I know, you thought I was going to go the other way around, didn't you? Actually, Superman is Superman. He has to pretend to be human. Not like Batman and Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne has to pretend to be Batman. Somebody he's not. Actually, I guess I get into a philosophical debate on that one. But spoofing is where I send information, packets, or emails, or anything across the network, but make it look like it came from another machine or another person. All these create threats for us that we have to be aware of. Now, let me ask a question. Where do you suppose most attacks come from? Well, you'd be correct in saying that most attacks come from the external or outside of our environment. We expect that to take place. It's kind of funny. Back in the day, I actually owned my own wireless ISP service, and I live in a real rural community of Salt Lake City. It's called Syracuse. It's a farming community. And back in the day when I moved here, there was really no high-speed internet. Well, excuse me, I could get ISDN. Wow, that brings back memories, doesn't it? Actually, nightmares. It was 144K, 128K. Man. Anyway, I paid like $80 for it. And I thought, you know what, this is just ridiculous. The city's growing. There's no high speed. Comcast isn't out here. Quest isn't out here. So I decided to become my own wireless ISP. I had a couple T1s dropped into my garage, converted my garage into a server room. I did some co-locating. And when I got involved with this, I actually had one of my customers was actually a good friend of mine. His name is Mark Burnett, and he's a white hat for Microsoft. He's written several books. And he told me, he said, hey, Dale, tell you what, since I'm your neighbor, and you're right, internet up here really is terrible, if you give me free internet service, I'll teach you what I know and help you to protect your network. And I went, sold. Didn't take me very long. And as we were talked about this, he said, Dale, are you sure you really want to do this? And I said, what do you mean by that, Mark? Of course I want to do this. I want to make some money. And he goes, you have no idea what's coming at you. And I go, Mark, we're in Syracuse, Utah. And he said, Dale, it doesn't matter. You are not in Syracuse, Utah, according to the internet. You are a number. And this is a really interesting concept to understand, because a lot of people will say, you know, I really don't care if a hacker gets my system. They can steal all my money because I don't have any money. Well, technically, I may not be after your money. I may be after your resources, or I may be looking for a fall guy. Use your computer to attack somebody and have them come visit you. Now, other places that attacks come from include foreign countries. We hear this in the news almost daily. What the most recent one is the Sony hacking scandal from China. North Korea? Yeah, North Korea. Now, I'm not about to sit here and tell you that the United States is innocent, because the United States is, even though we are a big target, and you saw that in the first video, we're getting DDoSs all the time. But trust me, we do the same thing. Let's see. I happen to remember an article is really weird. Back when the first Desert Storm took place, the night it launched, all the defense systems went down in Iraq. So just know that that may be another source of your attacks. Another one that a lot of people don't think about is internal. It's almost like retail theft. A majority of your attacks will come from internal sources. In fact, just recently here in 2015, Morgan Stanley, and for those of you guys who don't know who those guys are, they're one of the world's largest financial service firms. But they announced that customer information was breached. Now, it wasn't because some hacker was, determined to get in, or any type of sophisticated email attack, or any type of buffer overflow attack. Instead, it was an employee who stole data from more than 350,000 customer accounts. So don't exclude internal.